A child's life between the ages of 2 and 5 is crucially important as that of the first 1,000 days of their life. Indications are that this period plays a significant role in their early development, but also could be a corrective period so that they are prepared for school and a healthy childhood, as well as ready for their teens. To discuss this, we're joined by Dr. Catherine Draper, Associate Professor at the Developmental Pathways for Health Research Unit at the University of Wits. Hello and welcome to Radio 786, Dr. Draper.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's good to speak to you. Now, as we mark World Children's Day, and especially looking at South Africa having such a young population, what are the phases in a child's life, and how long does each one or each phase last?
Yeah, so in more recent years, there's been an increasing focus on what you mentioned, the first 1,000 days. And this really helped to bring attention to how the development and the health and the well-being of a child really starts during pregnancy. And so the first 1,000 days is pregnancy and the first 2 years of life. And then, depending on which country, obviously in South Africa, children at around the age of 2 or 3 start going to a preschool or a creche. We know that not all children have access to those services, but that was generally what we would call here in South Africa the preschool age or the pre-primary years, and then starting formal schooling at the age of 5 or 6. And so generally it's divided into, early childhood is defined in different ways, but tends to refer to roughly under the age of 5, and then looking at the primary school age and high school age. So then differentiating between, say, middle childhood, early adolescence, later adolescence. And so the next 1,000 days is a term that we really want to get into circulation to understand that gap between the first 1,000 days and the time that children start formal schooling.
So do these phases apply to all children? Looking at, of course, each child is different. So there may be different factors that may also influence how they develop through these 2,000 days. So how do we then address that, and also looking at how that then addresses the issues around the child's development?
Yeah, so as you're absolutely right, children develop at different stages and at different speeds. And there are different aspects of development that are important. So their cognitive development, motor skills, gross and fine motor skills, social and emotional skills, numeracy and literacy skills. And so, children develop in those different areas of development at different speeds, and that's totally normal. I guess what is common to all children is that there's certain periods where there's a really big improvement in those skills. And what we call often is like a critical window of time where we can really invest in helping children optimize those different skills in the different areas. And so the next 1,000 days is particularly important for things like cognitive development, laying down those building blocks of early numeracy, early literacy that help them with more academic skills as they enter formal schooling, and then social and emotional skills. Again, it's as children are now starting to speak, they're starting to interact with peers, they're interacting with siblings, adult caregivers, different people in their neighborhood. And so they're developing those kind of skills as well from a social and emotional point of view that then help them manage the social and emotional environment of school as well. So yes, children do develop at different speeds in the different areas, but we do tend to highlight that next 1,000 days period is a really important time to lay down the foundations of many of those skills. And that's going to look different for each child, but within that period, the opportunity for growth and development is really crucial.
So now the focus has always been, I suppose, on the first 1,000 days, and you've laid that out as to what happens there. But with the 2,000 days, what is the research actually showing, and what is also needed to support the next 1,000 days?
Yeah, and so, really importantly, the idea is not to say one phase is more important than the other. And so now, too much attention's been paid to the first 1,000 days. Now we need to shift our attention. The aim is really, particularly of the articles that we just published on this in the Lancet, is that so much has gone into the investment in the first 1,000 days, and we want to build on that. We want to keep that energy and that attention as we go through, and not think, well, okay, but children go off to creche or they go to preschool, and then we pick up all sorts of challenges as they enter formal schooling. So it's really to emphasize what we talk about as a life course perspective, that children don't develop in kind of discrete time zones, in that, one is better than the other, but it's how do we build on these so that we see how that child's developmental pathway or trajectory is really pulled through those different phases. And so it's about understanding what are the critical ways that we can intervene around the things that influence children's development in the next 1,000 days, that can build on the first 1,000 days, and what are the unique opportunities. So for instance, in the first 1,000 days, children spend quite a bit of contact time at health facilities. So they may be going for immunizations, for checks. But as children transition from the first 1,000 days to the next 1,000 days, the times that they're going to go to a clinic or to a doctor's is usually when they're sick or they're injured. And so that health facility and that health connection becomes less relevant as the touch point for how to connect with caregivers and young children in the next 1,000 days. Whereas going to ECD centers or being part of play groups or home visiting programs, those early learning opportunities then become much more of an easier way to connect with young children and to input into their lives. And it then is important to understand that it's not ECD center versus the home, and one becomes more important, but both of those are important. So the importance of family and home environments remains important, but we have this other setting where children are spending a lot of time, they're getting a lot of input, and so that becomes a really critical way in which young children's development and well-being can be influenced. And as we know, there's a huge amount of effort, different organizations around South Africa that really put an enormous amount of work into making sure that ECD experience is really valuable and that it's of quality, but we know there's a lot more to be done, and many children that aren't reached by those services. So there's still much more to be done.
So is there an opportunity, I suppose, to have interventions? I mean, obviously, not every household is able to have that kind of support. And oftentimes it's both parents are working. They don't really get that contact time with their children to put in the time to ensure that, to sit and read with them, to work on those skills as you've outlined. So once they get to school, often we'll see there may be a gap in how children are able to adapt to that situation, as well as also to how they are able to learn, how quickly they compare to others when it comes to the learning phases, when it comes to formal schooling. So are the interventions available at that level, and do we have, I suppose, the skills within our grade R and up to be able to address those things?
Yeah, so, many of those interventions, some are done by community-based organizations, NPOs, NGOs that are working, across, various different parts of South Africa to work with caregivers, to run workshops, to also help caregivers understand what it is that they can do. Because you're right that for many parents who are working, time is limited. You're leaving, early for work, you're coming home late, and so you maybe feel that you don't have that time. So many of these interventions can really help to focus on, well, what are the small things that you could do, and help caregivers and parents to understand the value of those small things. So when you're reading or what you're doing, or when you're walking to the shops, what you can point out to children, what can you point out in the home to help them learn colors or their shapes or their numbers. And so it's not about an emphasis on having lots of time and lots of resources, but really helping them to feel that within their environment and what they have, there are things that can be done. So there are interventions, many interventions that work on literacy, for example. There's many initiatives in South Africa that try and make books available in local languages, in great formats that are suitable for kids, that are free. So there's many of those things as well. Obviously, there's room for a lot more. And sometimes we don't always hear about the research around these interventions. And so there's opportunities for researchers like me. We do a lot of work with community-based organizations to understand, well, where are the needs, and how can we develop things together that meet those needs in ways that are appropriate for the different contexts within South Africa. Because it's very easy to develop interventions, but if those are not necessarily going to work, a lot of effort can be put in. So it's really best for us to work in partnership so that we can come up with things that meet the needs and that are appropriate for our local contexts.
Dr. Draper, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. She is an associate professor at the Developmental Pathways for Health Research Unit at the University of Wits. Of course, Dr. Catherine Draper, they're looking at the first key stages of a child's life, the first 2,000 days, which are seen as crucially important as that of for the child's development. Indications also showing that this period plays a significant role in the early development, but also could be a corrective period so that they are prepared for school and a healthy childhood as well.